Chris Helali, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, so recently you had sent me this video of yourself in Doha meeting with a senior Hamas official as an independent journalist and discussing various things. Could you tell us a little about that?
Sure, absolutely. Some months ago, at a conference, I made a connection and I asked to interview some of the senior leadership of Hamas in Doha, in Qatar. And we had finally set up the opportunity. And I traveled to Doha, was able to meet them at their political office there. And I met with Dr. Bassem Naim, who served as formerly as a minister of health. He's a doctor, and then I also met with Osama Hamdan, another senior member in the political bureau of Hamas. And we both sat down and we were able to, basically discuss a lot of the ongoing situations facing the Palestinian people, the ongoing genocide in Gaza, the incursions in the West Bank, the ongoing settlement construction, and of course, top of the mind for everyone is the ongoing negotiations for a ceasefire. So it was a almost 2 hour long conversation, and it was really insightful and fruitful. And I thought that it was an amazing opportunity to hear from the officials themselves, from the resistance themselves, what they are seeing, what they are understanding, what they are communicating with their people on the ground, and of course how these negotiations are going.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's better, always better to hear things directly from the horse's mouth, as it were, but very controversial interview nonetheless. And so, I actually remember Dr. Bassam, I think I'm saying his name right. He was suspended from Twitter during the previous regime, as it were, of Twitter, formerly Twitter, I should say. But he had been pretty outspoken in public about like who he was and what he was doing at the time. Now, recently, Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the Hamas Politburo, was assassinated in Tehran, and uh, Iran has yet to respond to that. So, did did you sense any sense of did you get any sense, I should say, of disorganization, or did they seem to? I mean, they elected Yahya Sinwar. I think it was maybe 2 weeks later, and he is far less moderate than Ismail Haniyeh was, or at least that is the consensus of many spectators and observers, such as myself. So I was wondering what your impression of their, internal systems are. Are they still operating at full capacity? Were they set back at all? What impression did you get when you were speaking with them?
So I raised the issue, of course, of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and Osama Hamdan said something very profound. He said that while brother Ismail was assassinated, his blood is not worth more just because he's the leader of, of their organization compared to all of the other Palestinian men, women, and children being butchered in this ongoing genocide. And so, in that way, they saw the brother's death and murder as the same as everyone else who's being murdered, and they didn't place it on a pedestal, and they didn't put it higher than anybody else's. And I think that's very important to understand and to recognize that even though he is seen as a martyr, he's one of the tens of thousands, if not more, martyrs in this ongoing genocide. And so I think that they are being very careful, they're being very strategic, they're taking their time, they're not rushing to do anything. And from what I understood from the conversation and from my questioning, they really are thinking about a much bigger and longer term vision and perspective, because for them it's not only about the struggle and the resistance, it's about the day after, it's about a free and independent Palestine, it's about the right of return. And so there's a lot more that's involved than just one individual or a group of individuals who are leaders of the resistance, who are assassinated and killed, and to have a response. The main thing is to protect the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. And so I think that whatever they're planning, which I, of course, am not privy to, I was just there interviewing them. Whatever they're planning is definitely done methodically, carefully, and with a tremendous amount of real care into how it goes. and how it proceeds. And so that's why we have not necessarily seen a response. I think they're waiting for the time and the place, and even the Iranian authorities have said that as well.
I can't imagine that it set them back too much, or that they're trying to exceptionalize Ismail Haniyeh in any way. But I do wonder if perhaps there was uh, a sort of boost of morale in a sort of in a way you wouldn't expect among the rank and file of Hamas, sort of a rallying cry as a result of his assassination. Now, this was in Doha, correct? In
Correct.
Qatar.
Correct.
Okay, I've been there once at the airport. It's like stepping into another world. It's like nothing I've ever seen. I'm assuming you were at that same airport.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. And so you spoke about how the plans for the ceasefire. How is that coming? Because it seems like we're only days away, and the Biden administration is constantly saying we're making significant progress, and then they say the opposite thing a few days later. And I get the sense that, and I say this as a Jewish man, but as an anti-Zionist Jewish man, I get the sense that Israel doesn't actually want a ceasefire. The Israeli government, perhaps the sentiment in the population itself has changed over the past 9 months, but I get the sense that, for one reason or another, perhaps it's because Benjamin Netanyahu wants to avoid a corruption trial. He wants to maintain his grip on power. Or perhaps it's because he's in a rock and a hard place with the sort of Kahanist figures like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Basil Smotrich in his cabinet, and he can't really function or operate a government without their consent. But I get the sense Israel does want a ceasefire, and I get the sense Hamas does, but that they've already lost so much that what incentive do they have to sort of give up those hostages or those prisoners of war in some cases if they don't get exactly what they want, i.e., a complete withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and the continued their continued governance of the Gaza Strip. So, what are they looking for? I mean, this meeting was how long ago? Just a few weeks, or
This meeting with that I had, the interview I had with them was just about a week and a half ago.
wow, yeah. So, what sense did you get in terms of what they're actually looking for a ceasefire to actually happen?
So we actually spent about 20, 25 minutes on this topic, and they went step by step, play by play, how the negotiations have gone and the process for hopefully reaching a permanent and lasting ceasefire. And one of the main things that Osama Hamdan conveyed to me was that at every step, the Hamas leadership has been forthright in what they were looking for and laid it all out for the Israelis. And come a few days before actual agreement of whatever proposal Hamas has given, the Israelis will commit an atrocity. They will take over an area. They will launch a military campaign. And all of these things are meant to disrupt the negotiations, to create some level of um, uh, it's meant really to destroy any of the good relations that are had amongst the diplomats and amongst the negotiators, and really sour the pot. And so, in that way, this sort of, whether it's covert, any sort of activities that they're doing, what basically Osama Hamdan said was the Israelis at every point have committed atrocity after atrocity on the verge of accession to a ceasefire because ultimately they don't want a ceasefire. It's not in their interest to have a ceasefire, whether that's for Netanyahu's corruption, but Osama Hamdan thinks it's more so to continue to carry out the aims of the Israeli military and to continue to try as much as possible to destroy and degrade the capabilities of the resistance and of the popular support of the resistance amongst the Palestinian people so that they accept an even worse ceasefire agreement. For example, the question over the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. Now, Hamas has said in every single negotiation that they want a full and complete withdrawal. But as the negotiations have gone on, the Israelis continue to give back more and more documents saying that they want this territory, they want to maintain this access, or for example, now that they want to maintain the Philadelphia border crossing, which is the border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, right? Which includes the Rafah crossing.
You can explain in greater depth just how important that crossing is to the audience, because I mean that is a way in which Hamas, the resistance in general, is able to maintain a sort of a lifeline of various supplies, including weapons. And I think that that is, um, you know, if Gaza is going to have an existence under Hamas afterwards, and I assume it's going to, because Hamas is more so an ideology at this point than an actual organization. I mean, it's an organization as well, but it's not one you can just defeat. I think it was about a month and a half ago, a big CNN investigation came out that showed that actually there were only 3 out of something like 22 total battalions that had been completely just destroyed, and that all these other battalions that Israel had claimed they had destroyed had managed to rebuild themselves. And I mean, and so the Philadelphia corridor is very important, not only during wartime, but in a ceasefire situation to rebuild Gaza, control over that corridor. If Israel's have control over it, I mean, look, even before the war, they're counting calories. They're restricting imports of things like concrete, and all these things will need to be able to come in to Gaza during and after the war in order to sustain the population and rebuild it.
No, you're absolutely
So
right.
I guess So I guess you can. It's important for people to understand just how critical that corridor is. So I'm glad you brought that up. And so they've made it clear that they need to maintain control, and they've committed atrocity after atrocity. Israel has committed atrocity after atrocity in order to sabotage these ceasefire negotiations. Did you get any hint? And I think this is interesting. Uh, did you get any hint on who they would prefer as the president of the United States? Are they thinking like, okay, maybe a Kamala Harris is, perhaps more sympathetic to us because she has this progressive base, or do they think, well, maybe Trump will play hardball with the Israelis, or do they think, okay, no, Trump is just he gave them the embassy in Jerusalem, and this is the worst case scenario? What did you get a sense of how they see things?
I did actually. So we talked about the elections coming up, and I asked them their perspective. And for them, they made it very clear that the United States is responsible for this genocide along with Israel, and that the US government, not the American people, and they made it very clear that this was done not in the name of the American people, but the American government acting in a rogue way against the wishes of the American masses. And so, in that way, they tried to make a really a distinct separation between what they believe is the American people who support at least the rights of the Palestinian people to a state, to their freedom, to their dignity, and the US government that continues to support without any hesitation the Israeli government. And so, of course, they basically said that Harris or Trump, it's business as usual for the US government in terms of its relations to Israel. However, they said that their hope is with the young people and the people of conscience in the United States who continue to advocate for a ceasefire, for BDS, who continue to advocate for the rights and the dignity of the Palestinian people. And they were extremely surprised. And of course, it warmed their hearts to see the student movement and to see so many young people willing to risk so much in defense of the Palestinian people. And here, they didn't talk about their organization as much. They spoke about the Palestinian people as a whole, regardless of political affiliation, regardless of religion. They see themselves not only as members of Hamas, but as Palestinian nationalists. They see themselves as fighting for the Palestinian nation of all the Palestinian people. And I think that was very important. They see anybody who supports the Palestinian cause on any ideological or religious line as being a brother or a sister in that struggle. And so I thought that that was very important when they were speaking about the American people and about the support that the Palestinian liberation struggle has received. That they, of course, were extremely grateful and showed a lot of that gratefulness to me when we were there in their conversation with me. That this was not only surprising, but something really that they believe will lead to better results and a better future for the Palestinians and for all oppressed peoples, because young people in America have grown a sense of consciousness and now have seen the ills of the U.S. government, and hopefully will try to change that.
Yeah, I mean the protests and the students during previous wars were so critical to ending them, particularly the Vietnam War. So I don't think it can go unstated how important those protests are, even if we don't agree with everything they do, such as tearing down and desecrating flags and statues. Even if we don't agree with all their opinions, the overall importance and is cannot be understated. And I mean, I'm not in the U.S., but I am aware that the new school year is starting. So I'm hoping to see a sort of revamping, re-upping of these protests, and hopefully they have some more staying power, because they did go on for quite a while, and it put some folks in some awkward positions, and it put a lot of pressure on the Biden administration. I think that's part of the reason why they seem to be pushing extra hard for a ceasefire, although like Israel's like sort of a mad dog off of a leash at this point, and the U.S. is just trying to get it back on the leash, but not really willing to. When my dog runs away, I go and pick him up. That's not, and I take him home. That it does not seem to be happening, which is really unfortunate. And I think that what's happening is really just unconscionable. What's happening in Gaza is just unconscionable, and it's gotten worse in the West Bank as well. Over 600 people have died since October 7th in the West Bank, and there was just a major incursion. And even CNN cited used a headline, that Gaza-style operation, and sort of the first of its kind in some 22 years. Tanks, warplanes, helicopters, in Jenin, particularly, and I believe I'm saying it correctly, Tulkaram. So it doesn't seem like it's slowing down, although it's without question that Hamas is going to keep fighting, and that Hamas is representing the Palestinian people in this fight. And they don't even have a presence, a significant one by any means, in the West Bank yet. I think this invasion of the West Bank that's happened just in the past few days kind of shows that this isn't really about Hamas, right? This is about controlling the territory. And I think, in my opinion, if Israel successfully takes Gaza, they're not going to stop there. They're going to go for the West Bank. They're going to go for Lebanon and Hezbollah, and then they'll go for more of Syria. They've already taken the Golan Heights. They'll start with the Philadelphia corridor, but what's from stopping them from going into Egypt and Jordan after all of that, and establishing the so-called Greater Israel Project? I think that's what a growing faction in the Israeli government actually wants. These Kahanists, which I referenced before, and for those who don't know who Kahan is, there was a Rabbi Kahan, convicted Israeli terrorist, and it's sort of his ideology that these people like Itamar Ben-Gvir are followers of. And so, did you get a sense that there is? I mean, it's hard to draw red lines at this point, right? I mean, but did you get a sense that there were any red lines which would cause a major change in tactics of Hamas? Just just recently there was a former member who just recently actually lost the election to replace Ismail Haniyeh, talking about possibly suicide attacks coming back. But he's not actually got any power as far as I'm aware at this point. So do you get the sense that there are any red lines that would lead to sort of a revamping up of more aggressive kind of attacks from Hamas?
I mean, in terms of red lines, we really spoke about the red lines that would be part of any sort of a ceasefire negotiation and what those would be. For example, like we mentioned, the Philadelphia corridor and things like that. In terms of red lines, in terms of escalating the resistance or changing the tactics of the resistance, so long as this genocide goes on, they emphasize that they have the right to resist under international law. And so I took that to mean that the resistance will continue, and of course, it might change tactics. It's other resistance movements have done that historically to try to gain an advantage or to try to press an advantage on the battlefield. It's certainly possible. They did not reveal anything like that to me in our conversation. However, I also have seen similar reports that maybe the days of the suicide bombings, like we saw in the 1990s and 2000s, might be coming back. I'm not sure 100% if that's true or if that's going to be the case. But I can tell you that they were adamant that they have the right to resist and that they will resist until the last Palestinian is breathing. And so I think that that was indicative enough that, number one, you can kill all of these leaders, officials, militants, uh, anybody in the resistance. But as you mentioned, you cannot destroy an ideology and you cannot destroy a cause of freedom. I would hope that the American officials would have learned that lesson from the failure of 20 plus years in Afghanistan, where the Taliban came back even stronger than before, with tens of billions of dollars in US weaponry and material support, not to mention what we did in other places. So I think it's really important to recognize that an ideology cannot be destroyed. What you do is you change the conditions by which ideologies thrive. And ultimately, the only way that you can defeat quote unquote Hamas, if that's even part of any sort of equation of the West, is to give the Palestinians a state and allow them to build a civil society that changes the dynamics of the political forces there. But of course, that's not in the playing cards right now, and the Israelis are adamant that, and including Netanyahu, that there will be no Palestinian state. And so, of course, the resistance will continue.
Yeah, I actually absolutely believe a Palestinian state is necessary. What I would like to see is actually, and Hamas doesn't even demand this. Hamas wants to recognize in their most recent charter in 2017 says that they're willing to recognize a Israeli state, but they want a Palestinian state alongside that with East Jerusalem as its capital. They're not, looking to kill all Jews, and even in their charter, I believe it's Article 16 of their charter, they even draw a distinction between the occupiers, Zionism, and the religion Judaism, and explicitly say that they don't have a problem with Jews, they have a problem with their occupation, which anyone would. It's hard for me to put myself or try to even put myself in the shoes of somebody living in Gaza, but I feel like I would be, of course, full of despair, but also wondering why there hasn't been another intifada in the West Bank. And you've studied this issue for even longer than I have, which has been for some time and quite rigorously. So I'm wondering, what is your perspective? Why hasn't there been another intifada? And what might spark one?
I think there hasn't been another intifada because the Palestinian security forces in the West Bank, which are under the Palestinian Authority, under Fatah, basically, they collaborate with the Israelis, and so they go after their own people, their own citizens, and they have detained and arrested thousands who have been.
Yeah. Now, recently, Abbas was in Russia, and a few days later, after his meeting with Vladimir Putin, he said that he was planning on going to Gaza and then going to Jerusalem afterwards. I saw one report that said that Israel had said, well, okay, we're just going to stop him. But he said, even if it means that I die. Now, do you think this is just talk, or do you think there has been a change in the thinking of the Fatah leadership? And he's now realizing, okay, it's time to take some bold action. It's time to try to establish some independence, or is this a lost cause? Is Fatah a lost cause?
I mean, my personal opinion is that Fatah is a lost cause, and that Mahmoud Abbas has been a lapdog of the Israelis and the West for so long. He's lost the support of most of the Palestinian people. I mean, unless you are a committed Fatah supporter or get some sort of benefit from that, most people do have no confidence in him or in his leadership. And of course, there haven't been elections since over a decade, really for the Palestinian people. So, with that with that understood, I think that this is rhetoric, nice rhetoric. I mean, I would love to see Abbas push that envelope and actually take it to that level, but I don't see that happening at this point. What I do see happening is with this recent incursion, like you just mentioned, this massive military operation that just took place in the West Bank, centered on Jenin, which has become a hub of new militant and resistance activity. I do think that we will see more young people join the resistance. They have already seen that happening. There was just a report as I just before this conversation I was listening to on my way here that mentioned by a Palestinian journalist that a lot of young people in the West Bank are joining the resistance because they see no hope and no future. Because if Fatah keeps promising a state and no state has come, well, then the only thing left is armed struggle. If you are blocked at every other point, if your life is filled with raids and checkpoints and waiting for 5 hours to get to work, you can't live like that forever. And so I think that we haven't seen an intifada because of the repression by even the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank, but that is changing now. We could be on the cusp of a new intifada. The longer this genocide goes on without a permanent, lasting ceasefire and humanitarian aid and a full withdrawal by Israeli forces, I believe each day builds the statistical possibility of not only an intifada, but something that we haven't seen before. It's something to the level of one of the great wars in the history of this region. And I think that people, quite frankly, are at their ends. They're at their they don't know what else to do except to resist in any way that they can, whether that's through armed struggle, through boycotts, through strikes, whatever it might be. I think that we're going to see a lot of that so long as this genocide continues and there is no solution in sight.
Hey guys, this was just a clip of a longer show. Catch the full show by going to KimIversonShow.com. It is free. It airs Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. You could go back now and watch this full interview. I highly recommend it. Again, go to KimIversonShow.com. Thank you so much for watching.